Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, history has proven that it was a mistake to give this president the power to go to Iraq, and I believe that history will prove it is a mistake to give him the open-ended power that this supplemental bill leaves in his hands. This war is not what this president says it is. And I believe that we have an obligation not to vote for the continuation of a policy that empowers a president to simply continue the war at his discretion. Now, I've listened to some of my colleagues and others who have suggested that this bill will somehow change the course. Mr. President, I have to respectfully disagree. This bill does not provide a strategy worthy of our soldiers' sacrifice. Instead, it permits more of the same, a strategy that relies on sending American troops into alleys and back roads of Iraq to referee a deadly civil war. Instead of the same misguided strategy, I believe that we had an opportunity here. While I understand the votes and I understand the threat of veto, and I'm not new to this process, I still believe we had an opportunity here to elicit a legitimate, fundamental change and some commitments from this administration with respect to the way in which we would hold Iraqis accountable and the way in which this administration itself would be held accountable. And Mr. President, I say with all due respect, that is what the American people voted for in November of 2006. That is what they have a right to expect from this Congress. The fact is that we could show our support for our troops in many different ways in this legislation. I don't believe the only way to show that support is by letting the President have the full discretion to continue to do what the President has been doing for these last years. I believe the way you do it is by requiring and setting up real measurements with real consequences the Iraqis to stand up for Iraq. And I am convinced, because the last years have proven it, that the President is wrong to keep suggesting that we'll stand down when they stand up. I believe they will not stand up until we stand down. That is the reality. The fact is that the benchmarks that are in this supplemental are not meaningful benchmarks, Mr. President. The President has a complete waiver. All we require is a report, a certification from the President. Is there anybody here, based on the statements the President has made for the last 5 years, who doesn't know exactly what the President's going to say with respect to progress? And all we require is that there be some measurement of, quote, progress. Now, let me say very, very clearly, because I've been there before in this argument, I know what happens when you vote here in a way that people can easily try to pick up and construe as a vote other than what it really is. There is good in this supplemental. Yes, we need money for readiness for troops, and every single one of us wants our troops to be as ready as they can be. Yes, it is good that there is money for care for veterans, and our veterans deserve the best care in the world. In fact, the money available in this bill is a far cry from the real needs of our veterans with respect to mental health, outreach centers, the veteran centers, the VA, the care at the hospitals. That could be a great deal stronger. But we're for that, Mr. President. We're also for the money for Katrina. So let me make it clear to anybody who wants to try to distort this vote. I am in favor of the money for readiness. I am in favor of giving our troops all the care that they need and deserve. I am in favor of money for support for Katrina. But the fundamental gravamen of this bill, the heart of this bill, is the strategy with respect to the war in Iraq. The heart of this bill are the consequences that we invite as a result of our votes. I think in the last week or two I've been to 3 funerals, Mr. President. One funeral, the son of a man who is opposed to the war, a military man, a West Pointer himself, a man who gave his career, but he's opposed to this war. And he dared to use the word to me in a conversation on the very day that his son was being buried about how it was important for us to redouble our efforts here in the Senate to bring this to a close. How it was important for us not to allow these young men and women to have their lives wasted. A word that if any politician used, we'd be pilloried for. But the father of a man who was being buried used that word on the very day his son was being buried. Another funeral I attended where the father was overcome with emotion, speaking from the pulpit, left the pulpit, came down, stood beside his son's coffin and said, "I have to talk beside my son," and put his hand on the coffin and talked to us about his son's pride, his son's patriotism, his son's love of his fellow soldiers, his son in his commitment to what he was doing personally, but obviously the agony they feel over a war that so many people don't support. Mr. President, we have a responsibility with respect to those young men and women, with respect to those families. And I believe that responsibility is not met when you give the President the very same power to continue on a daily basis what he has been doing for these last years. There isn't one person in this body who doesn't know what this President is going to say with respect to progress. How many times have we heard in the midst of this war, Vice President Cheney comes out, "We're making progress." The President yesterday talks about the progress, even as he mischaracterizes what this war is about, talking principally about al-Qaeda, when all of us know that this war is principally a civil war, a slaughter now between Shia and Sunni over the political spoils of Iraq. And our presence is empowering that.